Thank you for that introduction. And thank you all for allowing me to join you today. And it was really moving to hear Kenny and his mom talk about their story together. And it really actually is a good segue into what I hope that we will talk about here in this time together, because I really do view mental health and wellness as something that is constantly in flux. So it's always moving. And at any given time, you might be feeling really, really well on kind of one end of what would be kind of a continuum of mental health and wellness, where you might say, I feel calm and I feel hopeful. I feel happy. I feel relaxed. And you might just recognize that you feel a lot of really positive things or good things. And then somewhere in the middle, you might not feel so happy or calm, but you don't feel too bad. You feel like you're doing okay. You might be able to point to other times in your life where you felt a little bit better, but you're not feeling very overwhelmed or sad. And then sometimes we go through periods of time where we might feel a range of different kind of more negative emotions. So they could be that you're feeling really overwhelmed. You might be feeling really tired and fatigued and unmotivated. Sometimes people feel really angry. Sometimes when we're experiencing things, it comes not as sadness, but as anger and irritability. And sometimes it can really impact our ability to engage in the things that we enjoy. So maybe it takes time away from friends or family, or time away from work or school. So we're going to keep that in mind as we talk today, that we're all at a different point at any given time. And there's no wrong feeling. We feel lots of different things. And I appreciate that Kenny shared that slide that talked about that whole range of emotions. And I jotted down that Kenny talked about feeling hopelessness at some times, and depression and anger. And I thank you, Kenny, for that transparency, because those are real feelings and sometimes they're hard to share. But when we hear that other people experience them too, it helps us realize they're part of our human nature. And Kenny went through some really, really tough things, as did his family. His mom talked about some of the things that she felt. And so it's important for us to recognize that those times do come, and sometimes those feelings stay with us for a while. And we're going to talk about how do we know when it gets to a point that it's become a situation where maybe we're experiencing some kind of mental health condition like anxiety or depression. What's normal stress? What's kind of like a temporary circumstance? And when should we maybe check in with somebody? But before we jump into kind of that heavy conversation, I have a hard time being with a group and just not knowing anything about you. I want to make this so that we can connect a little bit. So if you're comfortable in the chat, if you'd like to share something that you do that brings you joy or peace, I'd love to hear that. And as you're putting things in the chat, I'm going to just tell you that one of the things that I do is I hug my dog. I have a 32-pound Jack Russell and Hound mix, and his name is Sherlock, and he's a love bug, and he's just the right size for squeezing. And I know that squeezing actually is really good for stress, and it helps with regulating emotions. And he's big enough, he's not like a teacup chihuahua, so he's big enough that I can really give him a bear hug. And I know that my son, who's 20, when he's feeling stressed, will actually go find the dog and give him a big bear hug, or they'll wrestle together. So I'm going to pause for a minute and just see if anybody in the chat wants to share things that you do that bring you joy or help. And I am trying to see where I can actually see the chat box. I don't know if there's anybody that can help me read it out too if I can't see it. Oh, here's access to the chat. Okay. Oh, running or walking outside gives me joy and brings me peace. Thanks, Allison. Yeah. Nina says, the thing that brings me joy and peace is hugging my kids. Even holding them makes everything better. Yeah, being with people, connecting with people, walking and movement, working out. Yeah, thanks, Kenny. And that's really hard, because sometimes when I don't feel well, I don't feel like doing it. But my husband and I went for a walk the other day, and we realized that when we do it and we push ourselves kind of through it, it helps us feel better. Your body releases chemicals called endorphins and other fancy things that help you feel better. So that's a great one, working out. Gardening or just sticking my hands in the dirt. Yep, me too. Love the gardening. I message my siblings. We share jokes and supporting statements. Love that. Let's see, long walks. Laura says my journaling. Yeah, writing, journaling, grabbing a coffee with friends and hanging out. Yeah. Bike riding, even just through town, brings me so much joy, reminds me of being a kid. Absolutely, yeah. My family made fun of me on vacation. I found we rented a house and they had one of those bikes with the baskets. And my mom was looking out the window and she said, "You looked like you were like you did when you were like 10, because apparently I had a big smile on my face. I was feeling like a kid. I like the activities at Ability 360. Last night I made a clay pot. I love that. The art and yeah, really working with your hands. Other activities planned are paint night and group hikes. Great. Netflix are my favorite TV shows. Hello, I'm Michael. I love hugging my daughter and wife. Yep, more hugging. We love spending time in nature, more gardening. Hearing elders share their stories. I love that. Yes, storytelling is such a great way to connect. And just to learn about people who have been through things and appreciate their stories. Hello, my name is Shelby Curley. Working out, listening to music while going on horse rides. Yeah, equine therapy is a name for horse therapy, and that's actually really therapeutic. And horses are supposed to be able to read your emotions really well. I've heard that they can tell whether we're being honest and transparent. And they can't talk, so they're not going to tell our secrets, but they sometimes know when people are not able to talk to other people. So you might find they give you an extra nudge, or they kind of just know that maybe we're not doing as well as we tell people we are. So thank you for that. I appreciate all the sharing. And those might be some things to jot down, because it shows you the whole range of different ways that we engage in wellness. And what works for somebody else, even somebody in your family, might not work for you, because we all just like different things and our body responds differently and our mind. I have one of my adult children, my kids are 23 and almost 21. And they both experience pretty significant anxiety at different times. And one of them deals with things more by, or kind of manages that stress by talking to friends and texting and talking directly about it, like talking about the feelings. She's wired like me. We kind of like to just talk about how we're feeling. My other adult child really finds most of the stresses in the body. So a lot of it has to do with sitting in the right kind of chair or listening to music and things like that, but not necessarily talking directly about how they're feeling. So how do you know when what you're feeling is kind of just normal stress based on your circumstances, and when it's something that you might want to check in with a professional about to see if it's a mental health condition? And that can be really tricky. That can be tricky for both for individuals, like it could be tricky for yourself, but also for people like your parents, your family members, your spouse, because everybody around us wants us to be well, but it's kind of hard to tell when it's come to a point where it might be something that's that needs a little bit more attention, or maybe needs a little bit higher level of support than what you already have. So a good way to kind of think about things is what's normal for you is a good way to start. Like, are you seeing changes in something like and your loved ones know? Are you typically a pretty relaxed person? Are you somebody who usually likes to be around friends and do things? And if you realize that for a number of weeks or months, you are not doing those things, or you're behaving in a different way, or somebody around you says, gosh, you're really not yourself, that's kind of a good indication that maybe there's something going on, and maybe it's not just a mood. A mood is something that can change from minute to minute. I have ADHD. Moods change like, I don't know, 10 to 12 times a day, where I can feel drastically different things, but that's my mood. So what I have to do is kind of step back and think about, well, over a number of weeks, how have I been? Have I been more sad? Have I had trouble a lot of days getting out of bed? And sometimes it can be hard because you might talk to other people around you And sometimes they can minimize how you're feeling. And it might be that they're trying to be helpful. But I talked to a young person who said that he tried to talk to his high school friends about how he was feeling because he was having some extensive worries, which were actually phobias about things that were really making it hard to focus. He was thinking about them all the time. And his friends said, "Oh, yeah, we've felt that way too. We feel anxious." And it wasn't that they didn't care, but what he realized is they probably were not really getting how much this worry and anxiety was taking up of his brain space and how kind of big those worries were. And so some things to think about are, how much of your day is it taking up? So if you're feeling worried, is it happening all through the day? Do you find that even when you're trying to do things that you enjoy, these worries are popping up? Or maybe you're getting up and you're trying to get ready and the worries make it so that you just don't even want to go to school, or you don't want to go to work, or your thought might be something really bad is going to happen, and it stays with you for all throughout the day, and also day after day. So it's the duration, like how long, and the frequency, like how much is it happening throughout the day? Is it just like, oh, when I take a test I feel stressed, or is it I feel stressed and overwhelmed a lot? So it's helpful to just pay attention, sometimes even jot down, like keep track of in a calendar or on a chart somewhere. Like I give it, I tell when I do counseling, and a lot of times will tell teens, give it a number system. So you could pick a feeling like worried. I'm feeling worried, with 0 being I'm not feeling worried at all. I feel totally relaxed and chill. And 5 would be like, I feel more worried than I've ever been, or like my max, my peak of how worried. Maybe I'm even having panic attacks. And then there's kind of somewhere in the middle. And you can just, each day, where are you between a 0 and a 5, and give it a score so that you could look back over a month and you could say, what were my numbers? And you could actually take that and share it with your doctor, or you could share it with a mental health professional, or even with a parent, and say, you know what, can you just look at this with me? Because I'm noticing that I feel like a 4, which is pretty worried, more times than not over the last month. So just kind of pay attention to those patterns. And some other things along with that to pay attention to are your normal daily habits. And those include things like how you're sleeping. Sleep is a really good indication of how we're doing, just mentally, what we're thinking about. A lot of times when people aren't doing well, especially with anxiety, people will say that they have trouble falling asleep at night. Sometimes people have really bad nightmares about things, and they might, it might be that it might seem like it's not related, but sometimes people will notice that they start having bad dreams at the same time they're feeling really overwhelmed about other things. It's kind of our mind's way of working through things when we're not awake. Pay attention to your appetite. Sometimes people eat less and don't even realize it, sometimes actually lose weight. Sometimes people will do the opposite, and they find themselves eating more, but they realize that they're never really feeling full. They're kind of they're eating more to meet an emotional need, and realizing that it's not really helping, like they don't feel better. And then sometimes people actually have trouble with schoolwork. Sometimes when I was in high school, if I got anxious, I sometimes would take a test and blank out. Now, I had test anxiety, so I mentioned that wasn't all the time that I felt that thing. So that wasn't necessarily something, like the approach might be different. If I had test anxiety, today's approach a lot of times would be to talk with the school about accommodations, because maybe that only happens in certain situations. Like for me, it was math tests. And I know now that what I didn't know when I was in high school is that I could have talked to one of my teachers and said, hey, can I have extra time on tests and things like that? So there's different types of anxiety, and just know that if that comes up for you, that's worth talking with maybe a guidance counselor or teacher about, or a school social worker. Also, sometimes people will find that they almost scare themselves or they scare people around them because they're starting to do things that are a little bit more dangerous or risky. So for some teenagers, it means that they start driving really fast or recklessly. Sometimes people start using drugs or alcohol. Sometimes people will just, could be in relationships where I know that sometimes people will make decisions that aren't always safe with meeting up with people that they don't know very well. And I've talked with females that have found themselves just kind of not really taking the kind of steps that they need to make sure that if they're meeting with somebody that they're taking good care to make sure that they're safe. And then sometimes what people will find is that there's things that you usually enjoy doing, could be something that you do for a hobby, like maybe it's exercising, maybe it's collecting something. You might collect, I don't know, maybe you collect coins or something like that. Maybe you have a certain show that you really like to watch. Maybe you usually hang out with friends and you're not even really enjoying it. That's called, a fancy word for that is anhedonia. It's just not feeling things, not experiencing joy. And to me, I think that's really important because when I was a teenager, I was in that state of not experiencing a lot of joy. And at that time, in my area where I lived, there weren't a lot of counselors and people didn't really talk about mental health. So I talked to my parents and I said, I don't really feel that well. Something's wrong. And they brought me to see a pastor that I talked to. And the pastor meant to be helpful and said, what you're feeling is just normal teenage feelings. You're fine. And on the one hand, that was good because I realized, I think my fear was, gosh, there's something really wrong. It's something really bad. And there was a little bit of comfort in knowing that, okay, I was okay. But then also there was a feeling like, wait a minute, I'm not sure I am okay. So sometimes it's helpful to just realize that, other people might not be able to tell what's going on inside you. And on the outside, you might look like you're doing okay. It's really important to make sure that you're paying attention to how you feel and trying to tell people on the outside. Because if we can't put it into words and we don't share it with people, then other people just might not have any idea or might not take that next step that we need because they're just assuming that we're okay. And I'm going to pause just for a minute because I want to go back and make sure there's nothing I missed in the chat. So I see Carol talks about warm sunshine on a spring day. Sunshine is so healing. And actually light therapy is a type of alternative mental health treatment. So it's something that you can do without having to go to a doctor or anything. And there's a lot of research behind it because I like to make sure if I'm going to spend time on things, that there are things that are proven to work. And I didn't want to spend money or time on getting this light if it wasn't going to make a difference. But I live in Pennsylvania now, but I used to live in New York. And in both places, we don't get a lot of sunlight. We tend to be low in vitamin D, especially women in the winter months, the darker months. And so light therapy is supposed to help with that. And there's a lot of research behind it saying that it works. So I tried it. I bought one on Amazon for like $35 and I would put it on my desk about 5 times a day. So on work days while I was doing email and leave it on for 30 minutes. I noticed later on those days that I got a boost that kind of almost felt like having a good cup of coffee. So for me, it helped with kind of some of the ADHD symptoms. I also get a blend of like anxiety and depression because I want to be transparent today. These are things I experience in my own life. And that was something that was helpful. So not something I had to go to the doctor about, just something I decided to try. And I decided to rank on a 1 to 5 how well it was working to see. And I noticed over a couple of weeks that my mood felt better on the days that I used it. So just a little takeaway from that. But also, let me see, just checking. The sound of the ocean I'm seeing, being able to be in a quiet or walking. Yes, quiet. Let's see, major depression, and I'm currently going through challenges of progressing in life, even as I'm beginning to find a job, but my low mental health prevents me to achieve this endeavor. Yeah, it can be really hard sometimes with motivation. And so sometimes that's where we need to get those sources outside of us, because it would be nice if we could always motivate ourselves, but sometimes when we hit those lows, we don't have it in ourselves to just like pull ourselves out. And so it's not very helpful when you have people around you say, just feel better or just do this thing, because sometimes when you have major depression and it's at a level that they would say is more clinical or severe, you sometimes can't do those things on your own, and it's okay to ask for help, and sometimes people need that. And so where can you go? There's a lot of different places, and I've listed some of them here. You can see them on the slide. For some of us, it's family members. It sounds like it sounds like with Kenny, you had your mom and other family members around. Some of you mentioned elders, having elders that are around, and I know that can be a sense of support or source of support. There's a lot of people in the schools. So there could be like a school psychologist, a counselor, even some of the people that are not the counselors in the school, like the school nurses, will tell me that they oftentimes, people feel comfortable because that they can go to their office and it's quiet, and they know that nurses care about people. So that might be the first conversation that somebody has, and then that nurse knows who in the school they can help to connect somebody to. Other times it's been something like a coach that somebody has, or a teacher. I think the important thing is think about an adult who is connected to things who can help you, because your friends might be able to help you. If your friends are teenagers or young adults, they might be able to help you by listening to you. They might be able to tell you some tips. But what they might not be able to do is know how to access some of the other things you might need, or sometimes they might not truly understand to the level that somebody who had a little bit more training or life experience would. So that could be your first step. I know some people in counseling that I talked to said the first thing they did was talk to their best friend, and that gave them the courage because their best friend walked with them to the school social worker's office or something like that. So it's okay to talk to friends, but just recognize you don't want to stop there if you need more help. And then it could be your medical doctor. So medical professionals could be like a doctor that you usually see for your annual physicals, your primary care physician, they're called. It can also be a psychiatric nurse practitioner or just a regular nurse practitioner. They have training like medical doctors. Sometimes in areas that I've lived, when you can't get in to see a psychiatrist, or there's long waiting lists for psychiatrists and counselors, it can be helpful to look for a nurse practitioner who's able to evaluate symptoms like anxiety and depression. And that might be kind of one step that you take while you're waiting to do something else. And sometimes that first step can be medical. And whether or not you choose to take medication is completely up to each one of us. But a medical doctor does not have to prescribe medication. And you don't have to ever take something, even if they do prescribe it. It's still your choice. And they still can sometimes recommend other things. Like what they might do is say, hey, you know what? I don't think that medication is the first step. Let me help you find a counselor. I'll refer you to this counselor's office that I know of. So don't think that by seeing a doctor that it means that you have to take medication. And it's helpful to advocate for yourself and realize some doctors who are not as well trained in all the different ways of responding might want that to be your first step, and you want to just kind of step back and ask for more information. That's okay. It's okay for us to ask questions of doctors and say, you know what, I don't want to do that as my first choice. So who else? I want to just see, are there other sources of support that you go to? Where else are you going? Does anybody have anything? I'll just leave a moment for the chat to see if there's something that's not on this list that's a place that you go to for support. I know for some people, there are other types of groups that they go to. So it could actually be like an activity that you go to where the people are the support network. So maybe you go talk to other people. I know that Trudy mentioned, parent support groups. It could be talking to somebody else who shares a hobby that you share, could be other things. So it doesn't have to be, my point with this is you don't have to always go to counseling or someplace that's considered a mental health treatment. You can find other ways to connect, and you might choose to do many things at once. My care plan for myself involves a lot of different things that I do to keep myself well. So I would encourage you not to just choose one of these things, but find a network. A network is usually more than one thing or one person. Okay. Move my slide deck here. Okay, so how difficult do you feel it is? Is it easy or is it hard when young people, and you don't have to think of yourself, just think in general, people your age, young people, when young people are feeling anxious, overwhelmed, down, or depressed, how difficult or easy do you think it is to ask for help? Like thumbs up if you feel like, and I'm going to see how much of this I can see with the actual reactions. You could put a comment in chat if you want to. How easy is it? I am 49, so I would like to believe it has gotten easier to talk about how you're doing than it was when I was a kid, because people were not talking about it as much. But what is it like as a young person now, where you live? How easy? Is it easy? Thumbs up? Is it hard? Maybe in between? And I'm trying to even get it where I can see the reactions. I think that there's quite a range. So I think that it can depend probably on the school you're in, maybe the family you're in. Oh, Zoe says thumbs down. Yeah, that it's harder. And then likewise, to faith ministers, pastors, bishops, priests, sometimes you can read the Bible or contact a close brother or sister in faith, or other avenues of faith, coworkers with mental health, online. Yeah, online support groups. Yeah. And sometimes actually places of faith have formal counseling services. I actually provided counseling at a church that would sponsor sessions. Now they were limited in number. The church would pay for 6 or 8 sessions, but it was helpful if somebody said, I would like to talk to somebody, but I don't have the funds right now to pay for mental health. And sometimes, yeah, sometimes there are people that are trained in places of faith that are, they can provide support, and you might be able to meet with a pastor or with other people that are trained in the church to be supportive listeners. It can be hard to be direct about receiving help when you don't know what resources you have. Yeah, I agree. And sometimes I think it can be hard to name it and talk about it, and then because it lets out, like, even just telling somebody, gosh, I'm really struggling, it brings the feelings up to the surface. And then if there's no help, it can be even more frustrating. I think sometimes we minimize ourselves, how we're feeling, when we don't think there's help around. And so sometimes, unfortunately, that's what causes it to build up, kind of like a tea kettle, where then it just, at some point, sometimes people go into crisis because it builds up and builds up, and they don't feel like they can ask for help or voice it. And then when they do, sometimes it just comes out like, now I'm in a crisis. Whereas if we could talk about it before we get to that point, sometimes that's where we can put more things in place to keep ourselves well, so that it doesn't go to a point where it becomes actual clinical anxiety or depression. So yeah, it can be hard to ask for help. Now I want to take a little bit of a segue, and this will connect, but I do want to think about, as people, we come here today with some things we have in common and some things that we have different, and we all have different layers to our identity. And you can see on here that includes lots of different things. So it includes everything from our gender to our, to our racial and ethnic background, and to our religion. And you can see that there are lots of different things that weigh in. Even things about our families, whether we belong to a large family or a small family, whether we live in the city or live in the country, all those things kind of give us different perspectives, different advantages and disadvantages in how those things kind of come together in one person. So just curious, and you can put this in the chat if you want to, if you had to pick something about yourself that would be something you want people to know about you, like one of the most important parts of your identity, what would that be? What would you want people to say? Like, for me, like, oh, Adene is blah, like, because some of these things people won't be able to tell visibly. Maybe they can, but maybe not. So what would you say would be something that you want people to see and value? And I'm going to pause just for a minute and see what that is for all of you. For me, I find that one of the things, and it's actually not on this list, but I'm just kind of thinking about this, reflecting myself. I find myself telling a lot of people that I'm a social worker, not because of any professional, like it's not necessarily always a job that's paid well or well respected or whatever, but I think I want people to know that I care about justice and I care about people. And that's really important to me. So my reasons behind it connect with my values and what I want people to know about what they can get from me, like what I might be able to offer them. So I almost wish I could have like a badge that says like when I see an accident along the side of the road, I literally have to stop myself from jumping out of my car and running. And I have done this actually times where I've stopped and gone to comfort somebody who was in the accident, because that's just what that makes meaning for me, to be able to help people. So I would say that's one of the important parts of my identity. And then I see I'm proud to be Navajo and connected to my culture. Great example. I agree with connections to values and career. Yeah. So we have different things, and that might change these things. It might depend on who you are with. It might depend on context and setting, what part of yourself you want people to see, what part of yourself you can connect to. You might find that in one place that you go to, you feel comfortable talking about how you're doing with your mental health, because maybe, hey, I'm around a bunch of other females and my female friends all talk about how they're feeling, and that's okay. But you might find that when you go home, maybe in your family, people don't really talk about their emotions. And so maybe that is something, based on the group that you're in or that part of your identity, in that specific setting or with that group, you don't talk about it as much. But let me see, something's in the chat. The person's current state of their heart without immediate wrongful judgment or assumptions, not just in public, but emphasis to be well and understood among family as well. Hence, so to avoid family, be at peace with others. Yeah, at peace with others. Yeah, I think that state of being, the heart just being able to be what it is without people having to judge whether it's good or bad. I think that's important. I think I believe in the value of, I love, and I've heard this, and I'm not Native American. I don't have any tribal affiliations myself. I have appreciated in some of the settings that I've been invited to, that I have heard that in general, going to things like powwows and other tribal activities, that there's a sense of everybody belongs and anybody can show up and they're accepted. And I love that, because I don't feel like that's true in a lot of other settings. And I'm very sensitive to whether it seems like anybody can be part of something. I do some work on Cape Youth, which is a project that I work on at Cornell, and we just talk about everybody has a seat at the table. I think that's really, really important. And so, yeah, and for people to, that value of being at peace, Tyler, thanks for mentioning that. So let's think about, on the flip side of that, are there ever times where there's a group that you belong in? It could be culturally, could be your family. Sometimes family includes like the cultural ties. Your family may share the same, the same culture with race, ethnicity, religious beliefs, and things like that. But it could also just be your family in their personality types. But are there times when it can be hard for young people to talk about mental health? Like, are there certain groups where you would say there might be some stigma where it's not okay? And I don't know, I have no right or wrong answer to this. I just am curious how that resonates with all of you. Do you feel like sometimes it's not okay to talk about it as young people? I have heard in general, young people being, I do a lot of work with, we consider youth like, working age, a lot of the projects I work on. So I read a lot of things about surveys that have been done with like age 15 to like 20, middle adulthood, like 25 to 28. And I know that they're saying that as a generation that the feelings about mental health are that it should be something people talk about, and that there's kind of a push from the younger generation to say we're going to talk about it and we're going to kind of normalize that in comparison to how it's been talked about. So I am hoping you're experiencing less stigma wherever you are, that it feels like you can talk about when you're not doing well. Okay, so what I have heard, and again, this is something I open up to all of you because you can feel free to disagree if you have seen otherwise or experienced otherwise. But I do know that there is a long history of historical and generational trauma with Native American families, and that sometimes it can be really difficult to talk with other generations in the family, people that are older. So it could be grandparents, it could be aunts and uncles and parents, extended family who have been through some really difficult things, who have a hard time talking about how, not only how, like what happened, and maybe sharing stories of how the past has impacted them and the trauma, but also sometimes hearing about how you're doing, because that also connects with them and brings up some of those feelings. And so it can be really hard because those feelings can feel overwhelming, and maybe they don't have the supports to talk about how they're doing. But it can be helpful if your family isn't someplace that you can talk about things. That's okay. It's just helpful to know that there are other places you can go. So what I hope that you take out of this is you can live in a really, really loving family who cares about you so much. And yet there might be a need to take a step and just ask for a little bit of assistance around your mental health through somebody else if it's too painful for family members to talk about it. I think the other thing that's helpful to hear is that not everybody heals from trauma and from mental health by getting therapy. I think sometimes people think, oh, if this person just goes and they get counseling or they get help, that anxiety is going to go away. And I'm here to tell you, in my family, the anxiety never totally goes away. It gets manageable. So we learn coping mechanisms, or maybe find, medications and supplements and different things we can do. But it doesn't mean that those, genetically, sometimes those things stay in the family. So getting therapy isn't like, it's not like the one thing you can do and it's going to make everybody better. So sometimes even if you're doing it, you need to still have other people and other supports. But also there's a lot of people who never get formal counseling or mental health treatment, and they heal. And I love that about the Native American culture and some of the other cultures and spaces where people are thinking about those alternatives. What can look different? What other things are out there that are free, that value culture in the way that you want it to be valued, and that you feel comfortable going to. Because if you go to counseling but you don't feel comfortable, you might not talk about what you really need to talk about. So I'm wondering, are there places I've heard of some really really great. I went to KNAR and I was in an activity where people did just a brainstorming of a whole bunch of different activities that counselors could incorporate into sessions, or other people, like they could incorporate them into vocational rehabilitation services. So it included sweat lodges, it included storytelling and narratives, it included naming ceremonies and things like that. So I'm just curious. I love to hear the different ways that people are finding healing. So and whether it's connected specifically to your Native American culture, or if it's just something that you individually have found is helpful. I'm going to pause for a minute and just let people share, because what you have used might be helpful for somebody else on here today that they might not have thought of that. So I'm just going to pause and put things in the chat if you feel comfortable. I know that I have one young man that I know that actually finds a lot of benefit in connecting online and gaming with friends, has a couple game groups where they're small closed groups, and they talk about, like, as they're playing games, they actually talk about how they're doing and talk about life, kind of do life together. So that's been really helpful. I heard about, I want to make sure I get the name right because it's been a while since the conference, but people talked about smudging, which was new to me. I hadn't heard that, but people talked about that being something they did both in counseling and outside of counseling. And then they had kits that you could buy for that. So that's something that I'd like to know more about. Oh, making, jewelry. Yeah, oops, sorry, my chat just moved up, but making jewelry and regalia. That was another thing that they were doing at the conference I was at behind me as they were listening. And yeah, I'm a big crafter, and that hands-on activity is really good for regulating emotions and, yeah, creating something of beauty and very healing. Tyler says a person's current state of their heart without immediate, oops, wait, I think it jumped up. I'm sorry. I used to live out of state, and every time I drove home, I would pass one of our sacred mountains. So I would say a little prayer as passing by, or take time to stop for a moment. It was always so healing to take that moment for self-reflection and feel a connection back to my culture. I love that. Yeah. Oh, and mountains are so majestic. And yeah, there is something about being able to, like, picture it. Yeah, and picture the people that went before you and what that mountain meant, and just the beauty of, you're outdoors, and then combining that with the prayer. That's a mindfulness activity. So in counseling, one of the things that is used as a strategy or an intervention is mindfulness. And I have found it very helpful myself to stop when I'm feeling anxious and try to focus on something that's right in front of me. So it's things you can hear right now, things you can see. There's an activity where you think of 5 things for the 5 senses, or just, 5 things around you. So I love this, this idea of, I'm going to pull over my car as I drive by. I'm going to breathe in, what are the smells of the mountain air? What do you see? What do you hear? And sometimes we can even, people might be able to taste things. It could be just mindfully drinking a coffee. There's actually a mindfulness activity where people eat a raisin, and you're supposed to pay attention to all the things in eating that tiny little raisin. And it makes you really slow down and kind of focus in on this raisin. I have a friend from Indonesia who I'm super close with, and we talk and share everything daily, further in helping to support each other, mental, physical. That's great. Yeah. And so you kind of have that accountability of sharing. It sounds like things you're doing, and those things that you're doing are your wellness plan, right? So you have somebody who can say, hey, we agreed that we're going to do X, to get, like, we were both gonna do some walking. How'd you do with your walking? Or, hey, are you reading that book we talked about? And that's a benefit of tracking with somebody who you talk to pretty regularly. Staying in contact with my foster mother, who's more caring and sensitive to give me motherly support. That's great. And I love that you identified qualities, because it's important to look for the people that, when you're not feeling well, when you're feeling down, look for people that are nurturing and comforting. Sometimes we need to put some boundaries, like we need to kind of not spend as much time with people who make us feel bad about ourselves, or people who might be really angry, or, have qualities that don't bring us comfort, because it can impact how we're doing, how we're around. And if you're around somebody who feels peaceful, even the brain science says that our brains pick up on somebody else being calm. And the neurons, the parts of your brain that help us kind of process our thoughts and feelings, they are like a mirror, and they mirror back. So if I'm around somebody who's calm, my body starts to do some of those same calming things. So if I'm having a panic attack, It's helpful to sit next to somebody who's breathing, they're breathing calmly and slowly, and they're not getting flustered, and they are just sitting with me. And that in itself can make a difference. So yeah, being around those people. I'm a part of Matriarch Ways, where we're wanting to build community of support. Oh, and there's an Instagram. So if people are interested in that, we're on Instagram and Facebook, Matriarch Ways, and our email. Thanks for sharing that, Laura. Yeah, connecting to communities. If you have, if you don't feel like you have a group of people you can connect with, start your own, or look for one where you find like-minded people. And that sounds like a great place to do that. Brandy says, my friends and I get together once a week to talk about our stresses or even positive things that happen during the week. Then we have dinner, play a board game to continue to de-stress. I love that. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's a little bit of distraction, but it's also that social connection. It's being with people who get us and accept us, and who just take us whether we're having a good day or a bad day. That's really important. So thank you so much for all of that sharing. And I want to ask how important you feel it is, as for those of you that are Native American, which would be probably most of you that are on today, with the exception of some of us that are joining you as guests. How important do you think it is for Native American youth to connect to a counselor that is experienced or belongs to the Native American culture? How important do you think that fit is? So I see 3 highly important, Millicent says. Yeah, so you can see on there that it's 0 would be not important. Lots of 3s I see. That yeah, 2. Okay, pretty important. Very important, and I prefer. Okay, thank you, and thank you for sharing that idea, Laura, that we talked about. That sometimes it's important to realize. For example, you might not. I know that there are some youth that are told that they have to go a certain path, like, oh, you're at this this school, and maybe it's a public school, and that public school says you to feel better, you have to go see our school counselor. And it may be that there's an elder, or there maybe you don't have a connection, and so you want to find a way to connect to somebody who is a tribal elder. That sometimes I know has been complicated for people maybe that are not living with their family, not living in the place that they were born. Vocational rehabilitation has actually helped to connect people with elders from the tribe they were born into, because sometimes they don't live nearby. So that's really important to recognize, because elders are a great source of support for that. But I like them because they're experienced, have lots of stories, and always seem to be available, more than my own therapist. Okay, yeah, they get you, and you get them, and there's a shared meaning. I want to recognize that we don't always have, I know what I hear, just and this is in general for youth and young adults, there is a mental health crisis, in that there are more people who need services and counseling than is actually available. And sometimes there are not people that are available that either belong to the same cultural background that you do, or that are well experienced with that. And so there's a few things, if you're in that situation, I want to just give you a few things to think about, because I know it's not ideal. I mean, having that fit of somebody who understands or shares your culture is the best, and that is ideal. But I have seen sometimes where people really would benefit. They're really, maybe they're having thoughts of harming themselves, or they're having trouble going to school and they need something. They're afraid to try counseling at all, because they just don't think it's going to work. And I want to just share that counselors are bound by ethical codes. So ethically, in their profession, in order to be licensed and to do the job that they do, they have to be respectful of a person's culture. Now, they might not talk to you about that directly, but any counselor that you go to see should be open to and respond well if you use a little bit of self-advocacy and say, you know what, I am Native American, I belong to this tribe, and I would like to share more of the values that we use. I'd like to find out together what some of the practices are so that we can use them, or so you can support me, or maybe you talk to the elders that I'm meeting with so that they know what goals you're working on, and we can make sure that we're aligned, like we're both kind of heading down the same path. So I know that can be hard because you're bringing it up and it's a little bit of a risk, but professionally, they're supposed to incorporate whatever faith or culture or beliefs you have. It's not supposed to be about what they want or what they believe. So I think it's helpful sometimes to just think about how could you share some things with them if they don't know a lot, and if they're open to learning. I wanted to provide some resources that I found. Honoring Children, Mending the Circle, share some actual things. And I love that these were things these were in an article where they talked about how to take traditional training that most counselors get in cognitive behavior therapy, so CBT. And they said, okay, how can you do this? And also, while you're doing that, incorporate some things that honor the Native American culture. And so in that, it talked about how they created plans where they had individuals doing vision seeking, sweat lodges I mentioned, drumming, dancing. Now, maybe the counselor themselves didn't have the skills or the knowledge to do that, but maybe there's a video you could watch together. Maybe you could do one of these activities and come back and share. Maybe you journal after an activity, and it's a way of sharing something that you learned about yourself from it. So it doesn't have to be something they do, but what I'm encouraging is that you show that part of yourself to them in a way that helps them to connect your identity, what's important to you, who you are, with what they're doing, so that it's not totally separate. Because sometimes mental health is kind of a like medical approach of getting, sometimes the counselors are like, we're going to work on this goal, and they might not directly talk about some of these things. So it's a way of saying, you know what, I want you to see all of me. So let's figure out how to put some of these things in, and sometimes even have goals around them. So we have just a few minutes left together, and I want to just open it up and see if there are things that you want to share or things that you want to ask. So I'm going to just leave it to you, and I'll open up the chat and see if there's things that you want to talk about together. And by the way, the list of activities I just shared has a link at the bottom that you should be able to click onto that will bring you to the actual journal article that was written, and you could share that with a counselor, or if you know somebody who's a mental health professional, and say, hey, do you want to read this article? Because it can help them just figure out what they can do to incorporate some of those things. And I am not seeing anything else in the chat. I'm great with, if you want, I think you have a break coming up.